What do you think should be more important to the founder of a new startup? Should it be really fantastic copy or really fantastic design?
The Duarte method is made up of three things. One of them is content. We call it story. The other is visuals, and the other is delivery, how it's delivered. So if I were to stack rank them, the content is king. So it's content first, how it's delivered second, and how it's visualized third, because content can be structured in the form of a story, and our brains are wired for story. The 3-act structure and the rise and fall and cathartic release, we physically react to that. I get asked that a lot, where it's like, how did you know exactly what you wanted to do and then go pursue it? And that's not how my life worked at all. So it's been a more arduous journey to get here than probably most have. So I was raised in an economically and emotionally starved environment, which came with the neglect and abuse and all of that. Met my husband in junior high and went to a year of college, got a C- in speech communications, a D in English. Now I write books in English about speech communications. And so I dropped out 1 year of college and did what every bright young girl should probably not do, is I got married when I was 18 to the love of my life. So that was a real huge blessing. And then basically bounced down to the Bay Area with that kind of credentialing, and just had a lot of moxie, read every new business book, every new strategy book, every book, and could walk into the office of CEOs at 28 and tell them, like, hey, you're not doing it right. Here's how you should be influencing, and here's how to do the spoken word in a way that creates influence. So it's just like a lot of moxie, a lot of hard work, a lot of being at the right place at the right time, and the rest is kind of history.
It's amazing to be able to do that. And do you mind if I ask? I mean, obviously, you mentioned your sort of year of college background and all of the reading that you did after that. How did you get people, first of all, how did you get through the door of these Silicon Valley CEOs, and how did you get them to sort of take you seriously, as a young 28-year-old with plenty of moxie and plenty of, spunk about you, I guess, but, in terms of that lack of Stanford or Harvard or, Ivy League background, how did you do it?
We entered the market in 1988, the market being presentation development, presentation design. Before PowerPoint was real, we were using PowerPoint when it was still black and white. Before that, there were professional companies that made 35 millimeter slides. So what happened is it went from the hands of professional designers to the hands of the masses. And people didn't know, the users didn't know how to do this. And so we entered right then where there was this transition between professionally designed presentations and really crappy ones built in PowerPoint, really crappy ones. So we were, I think, one of the first agencies that specialized just in building presentations. And so my husband was actually a technical illustrator. He's an artist. He's my Renaissance man. And he could look at a device and draw it and almost make it photorealistic. And so when I first started to pitch what we did, that was the promise. I'm like, this was a long time ago. This was when people used to use black electrical tape and X-Acto knives to plot charts and turn them into stats. Like, it's like a long time ago. So showing up saying, hey, we could do that on a computer and make it look photorealistic, people were like, oh my gosh, like, please come and help me. That was one of the right place, right time, right message that resonated. And then once we got into the C-suite and got into some of the really big brands here in the Silicon Valley, one of the most significant things that happened in the business was about 93, Apple had a massive layoff. It was terrible for them, great for my business. All my clients there kind of scattered across the Silicon Valley into other organizations. So that was a big benefit to the organization. It was exciting. It's still very exciting. Kind of one of those Cinderella stories, I guess, right? Where it's been a long slog climbing out of, what could have been.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like you're crediting a lot of this to, obviously hard work, but a lot of kind of right place, right time. But I mean, there's obviously much more to it than that. Like, I can tell.
Yeah, there is. It's hard. I mean, being an entrepreneur isn't for the weak, for sure. I mean, when my kids were small and the business was exploding, I only got one REM cycle of sleep. Like, I slept for 4 hours. And I don't recommend that because now I sleep 8 to 9 hours every night, but it's what I had to do so that I could be a mom and build a business at the same time. So it was not without sacrifice to do this, and a lot of skinned knees and learned lessons along the way.
You set that business up with your husband, like how, and obviously it's a family business. Like, how has that been?
So he actually started it. That's kind of part of our origin story, and I didn't believe it. So I tried to basically abort his business, which then became my own destiny, which is kind of crazy. So I would come home every night from my real job and just kind of henpeck him, like hatchet him to death with my verbal words, like, this is dumb, this is stupid, send out your resume. I was very pregnant, very hormonal, was a component of it. But I was like, I just don't believe this can be something. And there's like twice when my husband had to get on his knees to really get my attention. And this was one of them. And he's like, please just read a Macworld magazine and you'll see that this could be a business. This could be a real thing. And this is like, the Macs were only out for a few years at this point in time. So I read it, and that was what I pitched. I took the insights from that and started to call. So he was involved in the business till about 92. For about 5 years, he got carpal tunnel. So he had to move into kind of accounting and finance. And then he's been part-time for about 25 years. So he's in it more as like to protect his investment, and mostly golfs and paints now, a little bit of a kept man. It was hard, like at first, right? Because I'm handing work off to him, he's doing it. And I did that whole marriage thing where you think, for some reason, women think we only have to communicate half the information and the other half, the men should read our minds, right? Yeah. So I was like, that wasn't fair, because I handed things off to other people differently. And so it was good though. We've always gotten along. We have a couple of fundamental beliefs about marriage, or even any sort of partnership, which is that you agree on everything. If you don't agree on a decision, that either means no or it means wait. And so we always were aligned. So there was never tension. In fact, when people would observe us in the office, they would say like, oh my gosh, #marriage goals, relationship goals, because we definitely have a lot of affection and admiration for each other, but we're opposite. So the metaphor for our marriage is that, like, I'm kind of the steamboat above the surface that's sputtering and loud and burns a lot of energy. And he's this rudder. He's under the surface, kind of hidden, but he's a man of great wisdom and comfort, and kind of tethers me a little bit. And so that's kind of how we're very symbiotic and massively opposite. And we learned to value our differences really early on. Concept of valuing our differences is systemic at the company now. So it was founded in our marriage, but now everyone we hire is very, very different. And we do a lot of psychometric testing, which my husband and I did early in our marriage to understand how to get along and have really honest communications. It would be hypocritical for us to be a communications company and be terrible communicators internally. We had an era where kind of the culture broke for a while, but now we're kind of back in a position of real incredible beauty and winsomeness. That's it's really lovely. The company had an era of part-time, not my marriage. So, there's part-time, there's parts of marriages, right, that get just super hard. This interview, I know, is not about marriage, but you asked, so.
Yeah. Well, you did mention something there, and I just want to just confirm that. You said you did psychometric testing as a couple, right? To work out your compatibilities, incompatibilities.
Yeah. What's interesting is we hired a coach. They introduced us to DISC, D-I-S-C. So that was when we were like, oh my gosh, when you plot our charts, mine goes like this, his goes like that. We make the letter X. Really important thing that this coach did is he said, let's write your life mission statements. And the most important part of a life mission statement is the verb, because that's the action. That's the action that you want. So we had this binder full of verbs, literally with columns and columns and columns of verbs. And we got to flip through this binder and find our verbs. So Mark's verb was like first column, first page, practically way at the front of the binder. I get through the whole binder. I'm like, my verb's not here. I'm just weird. And so he's like, what's your verb? And I'm like, well, it might be conquer or it might be liberate. And he goes, you're not weird. Those are just really important verbs. But the big thing was who you do it on behalf of, right? And so it's like, I love to liberate. Like I like to create space and environments for creative people to do their best work. So I protect, like I conquer anything that would not make a safe, comfortable place for creatives. Well, so my verb is conquer. My husband's verb, relax. Like that's his verb. Like anything that comes between him and relaxing is an adjutant. So, so that if it gives you a sense of how completely different we approach everything from business to vacations and stuff. So that's pretty opposite.
It sounds so solid though. I mean, maybe I have to say nice things in an interview, but I genuinely mean that. It sounds like a really solid way to, one, build a relationship, and two, build a company, right? Like those those roots go deep.
Yeah, they go really deep. And so ever since then, like we do psychometrics for, candidates. And if they're like, this is a trite, this is dumb, this is, we're like, bye-bye, because it's too systemic and valuable for us to show up and value differences. And inclusivity is such a big thing for business right now. And you can get the diversity in, but if you're not inclusive and don't create belonging, and part of belonging is understanding and accepting the fact that we're all different. So we actually really, really value them. Now we have about 6 different psychometrics we take and apply and learn from. So it's fun.
Your company now is one of the largest employees of female talent in Silicon Valley. I just want to find out, what is the importance of that to you, and what do you kind of think it does for the perception and direction of the Duarte brand?
Yeah, it's not that we employ a lot of females, it's that we're one of the largest employers that's owned by a female company. But either way, we have a lot of diversity. I'm very proud of how diverse we are, and we're working on even becoming more diverse. But we are 47% non-white, so 47% BIPOC, people of color, and we're 67% female. And that's really fantastic. In fact, one of our clients is a Fortune 5. I can't say who they are. And they said we are by far in the top 10% of all of their suppliers and how diverse we are. It makes me really proud of myself. I wish I could say it was intentional and that was my plan, because you tend to attract people that are like you. We tend to attract more females. My husband is Hispanic. So I don't know, it was just a safe place to be female and BIPOC. So really pleased with that. It did make it so we could be a diverse supplier. So I did have to buy 1% of the company from my husband, which is weird. So you had to be 51% owned. So I had to cash out my vacation and actually write my husband a check for 1% of the company so that we could be registered as a diverse female supplier. And now what I'm doing is we've been auditing all of our own suppliers, and we're starting to now make sure there's a good mix of half diverse of our own suppliers, which is going to be powerful. I think the mix of cultures, the mix of diversity is one of the reasons we actually do rely on the psychometrics and really understanding each other. And it's very exciting. We're actually coming out with a beautiful listening course. I don't think it's what people would expect from us, but it is so powerful, and there's nothing like it out there. And I think part of it comes from our deep understanding of each other and value of psychometric tools. In terms of that,
that psychometric testing, obviously, in terms of talent, depending on the department, you're looking for different things. But as a company, I guess a lot of your work around communication really revolves around persuasion and being able to communicate in a certain way that ultimately gets people to do what you want them to do, right? As a business, or if you're selling something. Yeah. That's a skill not everybody has. So how do you determine that when you're hiring people?
We look for lifelong learners. We ask a lot of questions about their curiosity more than anything. Like, do they stay curious? What do you learn? How do you learn? Why do you learn? And all of that, because that is the biggest part of being confident in who you are, helps you influence others. So influence is an art, and leadership is an art. Like, they're both an art. It's not, and it's almost like a performance art. I don't want to sound offensive by saying it that way, but it is a way. How do you show up? Like, we've not hired people. So I interviewed a couple salespeople, and I was like, show up as if you are selling to a public CEO of a massive company, like huge public CEO, right? First dude shows up and he's got like he's in his kitchen because it's Zoom. I mean, it's, COVID. He's got like a KitchenAid, a messy kitchen behind him. Now, granted, he's wearing a suit and tie, so I give him a little credit for that. Second guy shows up in his baby's nursery with a plaid shirt that's too small, and his shirt kept gaping open, and you could see his little chest hairs pop out, right? So we do require people to have a natural sense of presence, but not, I wasn't expecting much. I just wanted them to show up like they knew who they were, a first impression, right? So I think we do have requirements around, how people show up and who they are and how open they are to getting to know themselves better, because they will get to know themselves. So it's like, know thyself, manage thyself, and then you influence others. We have a good team. I love everyone at this company, and they're good people. They're good people, and you have to be good people to influence. Anyone at Duarte can publish. We have a saying that says Duartians publish. It could be publishing notes from a great meeting you had to writing a book. And so that's another kind of new filter that we've been applying for the last year. They have to have potential to be really good at the spoken word or really good at the written word. Exciting times right now for my firm.
Just on that, in terms of the spoken word and the written word, I'm really interested to know, like, what do you think it should be more important to the founder of a new startup? Should it be really fantastic copy or really fantastic design?
That's a good question. I get asked that a lot. So the Duarte method is made up of 3 things. One of them is content. We call it story. The other is visuals, and the other is delivery, how it's delivered. So if I were to stack rank them, I would say the content is king. So it's content first, how it's delivered second, and how it's visualized third, because content can be structured in the form of a story, and our brains are wired for story. The 3-act structure and the rise and fall and cathartic release, we physically react to that. So content is first. Delivery means that you're delivering it in the right medium. Like, should you send an email, or should you maybe look in the camera and tell a heartfelt note? Like, I had a client make a really big mistake and did us wrong. And we've been partners for a long, long time. And he wrote a really sweet note, very short, and attached a video. I could see his pity, his humiliation, he was so sorry. It was pitiful. It was awesome. And I was like, wow, he chose the right medium to deliver that message. And the only reason I stack visuals third is because you have the ability with the spoken word to craft your words into very visually vivid. So if you don't have the opportunity to have visuals, create very vivid narrative. So it just transports people into this world you're painting with your words. But they are important, because when people can see what you're saying, they know what you're saying. So I'm not diminishing its power, because all 3 together are powerful. Now, if those were 3 circles in a Venn diagram where they all overlap, in the middle is empathy. That's the number one thing. So empathy even trumps content. So you got to look at empathetically. Don't do a single thing in the Duarte method without first considering what your audience needs. Maybe you're presenting to an audience who needs to be visual first. Absolutely, only can really understand visual, especially a non-English speaking country. They like visuals with the words right on the slides. They want the transcript, the slides with the transcript at the bottom. So you have to think empathy first. So just always empathetically think about your audience. How do they process and understand information? And then work hard on your story, your delivery, and your visuals to meet them where they're at.
I like it. That's going to be useful. I'm going to use it myself.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on that as well, about you've done a very famous TED Talk, and I'm sure a lot of people who are going to watch this will already have seen that TED Talk about the hidden structure of a story, and how this ties into some of the greatest communicators that we know. They all have this structure. For anyone that hasn't seen it, first of all, tuck. But secondly, if you could kind of give us like a quick breakdown of what that structure is, and an example that someone could look at.
Yeah, so I spent about 3.5 years as CEO, getting up at 4:30 in the morning, and I worked until 11 every morning just studying story, because I had a hypothesis that the greatest speeches, if you listen to them or if you read them, they have this cadence and this rhythm to it, like a breathing in and breathing out. And I knew that I would be able to discover what was happening if I just studied storytelling. So story has a rise and fall. So that rise and fall an arc. And what happens is it builds tension and then the tension gets released. So I knew the rhythm and cadence was this, somehow the greatest artists were building tension and then releasing it. And so after studying story for ever, I had a book called The 100 Greatest Speeches of All Time. And I just kept studying it, kind of breaking it down different ways, trying to find this kind of magical structure that is underlying it all. And then I sat and drew it one day. I drew this structure and I knew it was true because I took Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech and Steve Jobs' iPhone launch presentation, and they both followed this form. It's not a formula, I call it a form because it has a lot of creativity within it. And it was very humbling. I remember that day, I kind of, it sounds dramatic, but I fell on my knees and cried. And I thought, oh my God, this could be used for good or it could be used for evil. So the very next thing I did is I looked up Goebbels' speeches, the minister of media for Hitler, and his speeches followed the form in almost perfect rhythm in it. And I almost threw up, but I thought, I almost thought I shouldn't let anyone see this. And decided that there are more people with good ideas that need to spread than there may be evil ones. Yeah, Ted picked up the talk, and the rest is kind of history. It's really amazing, and I've analyzed probably about 50 other talks besides the 2 that are in the talk. I feature the Steve Jobs and insights from Dr. Martin Luther King.
I love that you did that. That this is something that everybody might skim the surface of, but not many people go deep on. And the fact that you've done that, you might have just changed the world. So
yeah, I get a lot of I get fan mail that makes me cry, which is nice. But the difference in that is that, there's analytical appeal and there's emotional appeal. What this talk does is it introduces like a new appeal. I would call it an appeal to the imagination, like where people need to be able to imagine an alternate future, because a lot of times when you're influencing, you're trying to get people to go somewhere else. Like we need to start to behave differently so we can hit our sales numbers, or we need to start to show up like this in the future, and it really is about appealing to the imagination. And I'm really proud of that work, really proud of it. There's way more talks featured in my book, Resonate, and that's what the TED Talk was based on.
Just out of interest, have you always been like that? When you were you had that year at college and then you left, was there an awakening, or was it just like college isn't for me and I just want to read, I want to learn in different ways? I just
I always thought college was for me. I remember as a little kid imagining, that when I went to college, I would wear, Argyle sweaters and penny loafers. I don't know. I just always, and I used to say the word sophomore all the time because I thought that was such a cool sophomore. I would lay in the grass and just say it over and over. So I do think I did want to go to college. My mom abandoned us when I was 16. So I wound up not raising my siblings, but running the household, did the laundry, did the scheduling, bought the food, and so I just got that kind of knocked out from under me. And then when I got a C-, that was like scarlet letter, like big scarlet letter for me. I was actually a declared math major. So that's what you see in my work. It's very analytical yet creative. So that's where that kind of mathematical mind shows up. I'm not a quitter. I'm a fighter, and I don't go victim. Like some people could be raised like I was and feel like, oh my gosh, this happened to me. Whereas I'm like, whoa, let's go conquer the world. And everyone reacts to stuff like that differently. And I just knew I wanted a different life for myself than I had. And so I contrasted the two and just made decisions opposite of what had been dealt to me. So I think that oddly was a big motivator. And I talked about how empathy is in the very core of what we do. And that's when a girl is raised by a clinical narcissist, they don't naturally pick up empathy. We need to see it modeled, and almost always by our mother. And I'm not saying I'm not empathetic, but everybody's on a spectrum of empathy. You either high empathy or low empathy. So it's a spectrum. Because it was never modeled for me, I had to make models in my head for it. And so that's why every book and everything you see Duarte produce will always be rooted in empathy. And that's because I've clawed at that as this right? This void. I didn't want other people to not be able to process and communicate from empathy. I wanted to give them a gift on a platter of what was never served up for me. I think that's why I work so hard to liberate others and show them a way to have a different life, because I got to do that for myself.
It's fair to say, I mean, that's one of the most challenging situations anyone would go through. Right in your adolescence, right at the start of adulthood, you get dealt this massive blow. Would you say that's the biggest thing that you bounce back from, like either personally or professionally, or has there been something else in terms of setting up the business?
I think resilience is a muscle, right? And it's not like, some blows are harder and they make you a little more sore. But like even just this last crisis with the pandemic, it's my fifth crisis, and not that we created, but that happened to us from external forces. So it wasn't a new rodeo for me. And so I think, and we knew what to do. We planned for it because there's economic cycles. So we had gobs and savings, slept like a baby. Like you just learn. Don't go into debt. Like there's so many things that made us be around since 88. What is that? 33 years now. So I think that when Delta blow, you learn something new. So it's just like Frodo, right? He had to fight the spider. He had to climb to Sauron. I mean, it's hard. And it's sweaty and it's not easy, but you learn and you advance along the way. Yeah, I've had pretty hard things dealt to me, but I've learned, like you learn forgiveness, you learn adaptability, and you learn resilience. I'm pleased with that. Very human. Like the thing about story and being an expert in story is the middle of the story. Like in a movie, 10% is the opening, 10% is the ending, and 80% is the messy middle. It's the crisis, it's the car chase, it's the monster, it's the getting impaled in the shoulder like Frodo. It's and it's messy. Life is messy, and we need to talk about that. And it brings hope to others when people know life is messy, and I'm going to talk about it, and I want to tell you what I learned from my mess. And that's the power of story. And so I'm just super open to sharing about my big old mess. There's a lot of victories in there. I mean, every mess has an ending, right? And it's a coping mechanism. I'll be like, oh, life's hard right now. That's okay, because this is the messy middle and it will resolve. Like there's always resolve. And that's what always gives me hope, is the third act of the story will come and there will be resolution. And that's what gets me through my mess.
When you share, the mess, if you want to put it like that, like, do you ever cringe? Like, I know I do. If I share something particularly personal, sometimes I think, oh God, should I put that out in the world? Like, is that really the right thing to do? Like, do you ever have that feeling, or are you just over it now?
No, it comes back to empathy. So there are some audiences I would never go there with. I would share a lighthearted, self-deprecating thing. And there's other audiences, like when I speak to more female audiences, I go there. There's times I've wept openly from the stage. And so it's really, and this one time, I did it and I told this story and it was kind of grueling. They were filming it for TV. And then I was getting calls. I didn't even know. They didn't even get a media release form from me. And I was getting calls from people going, I just heard that story. And I'm like, what? I thought that was a private room of just women. And so, yeah, don't do that. But yeah, it depends, right? So some audiences you can have stronger emotional appeal. Others you got to stick with analytical appeal with just like a thin layer of emotional appeal. So think about, like, if you were to have to take a bitter pill, like a medicinal pill, they coat it in a tiny thin layer of sugar coating so it slides down quicker. And that, like, if you have to deal a lot of analytical information, the layer and thinness of story is thinner so that they accept this data. Whereas if I was speaking to a big sales audience, I would just go nuts with stories, get them all fired up. So again, it all goes back to empathy and showing up with the right amount of emotional appeal.
I mean, just on that note, I want to ask a question. Normally, what I do is ask people like you, very influential people, or people that have had a great amount of success, or both, just like you. What's the best advice you've ever been given? But I feel like, actually, to do justice to what you've done, what advice would you give? Like, what's the best advice that you would give to someone either just starting out and dealing with the struggle, which you obviously did, or who's, having a rough time and thinks, I want to do that, but I can't? Like, what advice would you give to them based on your own experience?
Yeah, I think I have 3 bits of advice, I guess. So first was, it took me a long time to realize that I could buy back time. So time is how you make bets with your time is the most important thing a leader can do. And you can tell your value system if you analyze your calendar. And so one of the things early on that saved me and my marriage was hiring a housekeeper to come in here and just take that off of me. Now, if I can hire someone to do it, I don't do it myself anymore, because how I bet my time, like we were talking about that kind of in the opening, is I have swaths of time. I have 2 hours a day on my calendar set aside, and I only do so many internal and external meetings a week. So someone like you calls, or I would love to do this exciting podcast, you might have to wait 6, 8, 10 weeks, not because I'm so busy, it's because I'm so protected. So I think it took me a long time to protect my calendar so I could make the right bets and then leave the right gaps for those surprise things that come up. And so that was a big one. The other thing that happened, there was a moment in my leadership where when you're a leader or a strong manager, you can do a lot. Or an entrepreneur, we can do a lot. We're really good generalists and can go really broad. And I was really struggling. The company was at about 36 people is all, and I was still the hub and everyone was a spoke. They would literally come in the next morning and there would be storyboards on everyone's chair that I did that they would have to execute on. And that was not sustainable. And I remember I was so buried and so broken. I hired my best friend. He had worked at Stanford in the animal lab, which is hysterical because he was probably the most qualified to come and deal with my little zoo I was trying to form. And I said, look, he goes, what do you need? I go, I don't know what I need. Just watch me all day and start writing job descriptions. That's how trapped I was. And I remember he would hand them to me. And each time I got a new job description of this part of my job that was going to be peeled away, I would take it home and I would weep over the loss of it. I would mourn the loss of never being able to do that again. Because I knew if I didn't consider that role as dead to me, the person coming in would not be successful. I would be expecting them to do it like I did, and so that was a really important moment, is knowing how to make bets with your time. What is my highest and best use? Because I like and enjoy a lot of things, is finding what I could dial in as the most valuable use of my time, and then delegating or hiring everything else off of you. So those would be my 2.
First of all, you mentioned your best friend there. Like, that sounds like the best job in the world. I would love that job. Is he still there, or she? Are they still with the company?
No, he's amazing. So he worked, I think, for 4.5 years. Then he became a leadership coach. And now he flies in private jets everywhere and tells this whole story about me everywhere he goes. We're still best close. He's my favorite buddy. And we're still very, very close. So he came in. I've had different people come in and help lead in different types of transitions. And one of the most beautiful souls I've ever known. So,
speaking of stories, I've got 2 questions left. And I'm really, really curious about this one, because I'm huge on the topic of persuasion, negotiation, copywriting. What books would you recommend to people, or podcasts? What, if you couldn't live without one of each, which one would it be?
I would say, for your audience, I love Masters of Scale. Reid Hoffman's podcast is so good. That's the one I like for podcasts. Leadership books, I think they're situational. Sometimes you pick one up and it meets a need. Right now I'm reading Forever Transaction as we try to move to be a subscription business, which is going to be a big transition. But the classics that rocked me, changed my world, absolutely everything Jim Collins wrote, hit a nerve. The books dropped right when I needed them. Good to Great, the hedgehog concept in there is, if you could do one thing and be best in the world at, profitable at, and passionate about, do just that one thing. And that came during the crash. And I decided to cut out all of our services. I cut out multimedia, print, and web, and decided to focus just on presentations, because I thought we could be the best in the world at this and passionate about it. And there were some people that worked for me that weren't, and we're like, well, this is what we're doing. Sorry, So all of his books just hit me at the right time. How the Mighty Fall just hit me at the right time. I would say anything Jim Collins wrote is a sure bet for leaders.
You could probably see my camera shaking there because I was like, although this has been recorded, I'm writing that down because you didn't mention any of the books I thought you would. I was expecting Robert Cialdini's book or Chris Voss, those kind of things. So good. I'm glad you went for something different.
Yeah, I think there's good books on influence. Cuddy wrote Presence, Cialdini wrote Influence, and we're in the same kind of space because we both focus on influence. Ours is rooted in leadership and story and soft skills and stuff like that. So, or power skills is what they're called now. The book on story that rocked me the most was The Writer's Journey by Chris Vogler. That's a very good one if you want to understand story archetypes and the straight shape and structure of a good story. It's just a priceless body of work.
Written down. Perfect.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of end today's interview with just finding out a little bit more about, as we approach the end of the year and look towards next year, what's next for you personally and Duarte as a company?
Yeah, so we set up a vision January right before COVID hit, and the vision was so profound and motivating to our team, which was that we wanted to transform how 1 million people communicate and how they influence. And it was just this lofty goal. People were so excited. I mean, they jumped right in and formed a glee club to sing about this vision, right? And then the pandemic hit, and it was just like,
there was
there's a glee club singing about it. And it was just amazing, right? The adoption of this idea and the whole strategy behind it was profoundly motivating. And so we are sticking to that. And people are like, are we changing our strategy because the pandemic? Or we stuck to it. And that's one of the things a crisis tests is it tests your strategy, it tests your vision, it tests your values, it tests your everything. And everything stayed true, at the core of what we do. And it's very exciting. And you're going to see Patty Sanchez on my team. She co-wrote Illuminate. I keep pointing over there because my books are there. And she just came out with her own book called Presenting Virtually. So you're going to see a lot more books from Duarte. We have a phrase that Duartians publish, like I said. And so you're going to start to see a lot of published works being fed to you through different forms of media, which is kind of what we talked about. So it's very exciting. And I don't want to share too much because we haven't announced it all, but I'm more sparkly about the future than I've been in a while. So,
and where should people follow that? When they want to see these drops, where should they be looking?
Yeah, so you can subscribe to our newsletter. Go to Duarte.com. There's also Duarte.com/Nancy where people can pick up a bunch of super valuable free resources and stuff because there's even free book up there. But so Duarte.com, and you can find what you're looking for up there, but subscribing to the newsletter. I also, at LinkedIn, I'm super active up there. So we do usually make announcements up there at the Duarte, the actual company page makes a lot of announcements, and then I'll re-forward them too, so.
Amazing. Right, well, I'm very conscious of your time, and I know that you said that was one of the things that you have gatekeepers for, so I don't want to get any nasty emails from them.
You don't want to be in trouble with her.
So, I just want to say thank you so much again for sharing. I mean, there's so much wisdom in this. It's going to be brilliant when we publish it. I really can't wait to see it.
Well, thanks, Rob. It was fun.